On the morning of November 14th, a truck pulled into a gravel trailhead parking area in the Selkirk Mountains of northern Idaho. The engine cut off at 6:47 a.m. That time was confirmed by a trail camera mounted at the parking area entrance by the Idaho Department of Fish and Game, installed to monitor elk movement. On that morning, it captured something else. A man stepping out of a dark blue pickup, adjusting his pack, checking his rifle, walking north into the tree line. That was the last time Raymond Cord appeared on any camera, any record, or in any confirmed witness account. He was 58 years old. He had been hunting this specific stretch of the Selkirk wilderness for 32 years. Not just the main trails, but the old game paths, the creek crossings that ran dry in summer, the ridge lines that looked identical from below, but were completely different once you were standing on them. His hunting partner of 14 years, Dale Fitch, told investigators that Raymond was the kind of hunter who could walk a section of forest once and remember the shape of the terrain for the rest of his life. Now, here is what investigators found over the next 3 weeks. Or more precisely, here is what they didn't find. His compass was never recovered. His handheld radio was never recovered. His hunting knife, his emergency fire kit, his 2-day food supply, none of it was ever located. The only item confirmed as his that turned up in that wilderness was found 6 weeks after he disappeared, 4 miles northeast of the trailhead. We'll get to that. But first, let's go back to that morning. Because the timeline investigators reconstructed is where a specific, stubborn problem emerged. Not a dramatic one. Not a single smoking gun moment. Just a quiet detail that no explanation could fully account for. Raymond and Dale had driven up together the night before and camped about 2 miles from the trailhead. They went over the plan. Raymond's intended hunting area to the north, Dale's draw to the east, radio checks at noon, 3, and dusk. A trip they had made many times. Dale told investigators that Raymond seemed relaxed that morning, in good spirits. Nothing registered as unusual. At the trail fork, they separated. Raymond took the north branch toward a ridge he had hunted every season for 15 years. Dale went east. Dale watched Raymond walk north until the trees closed around him. He didn't give it another thought. The noon radio check came and went with no response. Dale wasn't immediately alarmed. Contact in those valleys was inconsistent. He tried again at 3. Still nothing. By dusk, the temperature had fallen to 22 degrees. Dale had been trying the radio at irregular intervals for 6 hours. He drove to the nearest cell service, 8 miles out, and called Boundary County Sheriff's Office at 6:14 p.m. The deputy who took the call asked Dale whether Raymond was the type of person who might change plans without communicating. Dale's response, transcribed verbatim in the report: not once in 14 years. Search and rescue was activated that night. Tracking dogs arrived at the trailhead by 10:40 p.m. What happened in the next 2 hours would define everything that followed. The dogs were brought to the trail fork and confirmed scent. They worked north, following the route Raymond would have taken toward his hunting area. For 3/4 of a mile, they tracked without difficulty. Then they stopped. The lead handler ran her dog back to the fork and attempted the track again. Same result. Same end point. She brought in a second dog team. Same end point. The handlers worked the dogs in expanding arcs from that location, east, west, south, back down the trail, trying to pick up any direction Raymond might have moved. Nothing. No trail leaving the endpoint. No continuation in any direction. The handler's written report noted that the terrain at the endpoint was dry, flat, and not particularly complex. No water crossings nearby. Wind conditions calm. She wrote that she had no explanation for the behavior of both dog teams, and that the scent appeared to simply end at that location. She had been working search and rescue for more than 20 years. She said she had not encountered that before. The search expanded over the following days. 60 volunteers on the ground by day 3. A helicopter with infrared imaging flew multiple sorties. The Idaho Department of Fish and Game contributed personnel with direct knowledge of the terrain. No physical evidence of Raymond's passage was found past the scent endpoint. No gear. No footprints in soft ground. No broken branches. On day 4, 8 inches of snow fell overnight. Whatever the ground had been holding was gone. After 12 days, the active search was scaled back. Raymond Cord had not been found. The search coordinator's incident report contains a line that is easy to read past, but shouldn't be. He wrote that the absence of physical evidence in this case was, and this is a direct quote, more complete than we typically encounter in searches of this duration and scale. That's not dramatic language. It's a professional describing something accurately that he doesn't fully understand. And it was written before anyone had examined the 5 specific details that would surface as the investigation continued. Details that, taken one at a time, each have a possible ordinary explanation. Taken together, they are harder to dismiss. The first involves Raymond's map. Raymond kept a hand-drawn map of his hunting area that he had been building for 32 years. His son Marcus described it as extremely detailed. Trails, seasonal water sources, game beds, specific trees used as landmarks. Raymond updated it every season. The map was found in his truck. He had left it at the trailhead. Both Dale Fitch and Marcus told investigators they could not explain that. Marcus said he had never known his father to enter that wilderness without it. Dale said he would have noticed if Raymond had walked into the trees without the map, because it would have been unusual enough to mention. He didn't mention it, which means Raymond either had it and it was never found, or he left it behind without Dale realizing it. Investigators examined the map. One area drew their attention, a section of terrain in the northeastern quadrant of Raymond's hunting zone, annotated so heavily that the underlying detail was difficult to read. Multiple layers of ink, built up over what appeared to be several seasons. Unlike the rest of the map, which was precise and organized, this section was dense, layered, and hard to interpret. Marcus told investigators that, to his knowledge, his father rarely hunted that section. Steep terrain, brushy, poor elk habitat. He didn't know why Raymond would have returned to it on the map, season after season, adding annotations to an area he apparently didn't use. That question was raised in the investigation file. It was never answered. There was one more thing about the map. Marcus told investigators that his father folded it a specific way, a habit of years, folding it so the current hunting zone was visible on the outside without having to open it. The map found in the truck was folded that way. It had been placed there deliberately, not forgotten, stored. The cold case review in 2019 flagged this as unresolved. It meant Raymond had made a decision before entering the wilderness, a decision not to take the one navigational tool he had used for 3 decades. What that decision was based on, no one has been able to determine. The second detail is a witness account that arrived too late to shape the early search. A man named Terry Holbrook had been hiking a trail on the western boundary of the Wilderness Unit on the morning of November 14th. He was not a hunter. Sometime between 8 and 9 in the morning, roughly 90 minutes after Raymond and Dale split at the trail fork, he saw a figure in camouflage moving through the trees to his north. He described the figure as moving faster than a casual walk. Adult male, average build. He could not see the face. Investigators showed Terry a photograph of Raymond Cord. Terry said he could not make an identification. The distance was too great. He wasn't saying it was Raymond. He was saying he couldn't rule it out. What investigators noted was the direction. Based on Terry's position on the western trail and the direction he described the figure moving, the figure would have been heading northeast, away from Raymond's intended hunting grounds, away from the trailhead, toward the more remote section of the Wilderness Unit, toward the section of the map covered in unexplained annotations. The search coordinator acknowledged in his closing report that the witness account, if accurate, suggested Raymond had moved in a direction inconsistent with his stated plan, and that this information reached investigators after resources had already been concentrated on the northern ridge. By the time the search expanded to the northeast, the snow had fallen and ground sign was gone. He noted that earlier integration of the witness account would have warranted different deployment on day one. What would they have found in that northeastern section at full coverage density before the snow? Nobody knows. The third detail emerged 6 weeks after the search ended. A deer hunter working an area northeast of the trailhead contacted the Boundary County Sheriff's Office to report something he had found. A rifle leaning against a ponderosa pine. Stock on the ground, barrel upright. He said it didn't look like something that had been dropped. It looked like it had been placed there deliberately. The serial number matched Raymond Cord's hunting rifle. The rifle had not been fired. There was no blood. The surrounding ground showed no signs of disturbance. The location was approximately 4 miles northeast of the trailhead. Northeast, consistent with the direction Terry Holbrook had described the figure moving, and in the general vicinity of the heavily annotated section of Raymond's map. It was within the area search teams had nominally covered, but not at close range density. A search coordinator reviewed the GPS tracking logs from ground teams and confirmed that the specific location had not received direct coverage. Whether Raymond had been near that tree, whether he had left the rifle there himself, or how it came to be positioned as it was, could not be determined. The rifle is the only physical trace of Raymond Cord ever recovered from that wilderness. It is still in evidence storage. The fourth detail came from the search logs, Day 7. A ground team working the northeastern ridgeline, the same general area where the rifle would later be found, reported that their GPS units were behaving inconsistently. One device showed a position error of several hundred meters. Another briefly lost satellite lock. The team leader logged it. The search coordinator attributed it to satellite geometry issues caused by the ridgeline terrain, a documented phenomenon in the Selkirks. That explanation is technically sound, but it meant that the GPS tracking logs used after the search to confirm ground coverage showed positional uncertainty precisely in the northeastern ridgeline zone. the area most consistent with the witness sighting, with the annotations on Raymond's map, and with the eventual location of the rifle. The 2019 Cold Case Review could not determine with certainty whether that specific location had been adequately covered. The GPS data wasn't reliable enough to confirm it either way. A gap existed. Investigators acknowledged it. They could not close it. The fifth detail came from Dale Fitch, not in his initial statement, but in a follow-up interview 10 days later. An investigator asked him to walk through the evening before the hunt again, in more detail. Standard technique. Witnesses often omit things, not because they're hiding them, but because the detail didn't seem significant at the time. Dale mentioned that he had woken around 2 in the morning and heard Raymond outside the tent. He looked out. Raymond was standing at the edge of the campsite, where the cleared area met the tree line. No flashlight, not moving, just standing still. Dale assumed Raymond had gotten up to use the bathroom and paused on his way back. He went to sleep without speaking to him. The investigator asked Dale whether Raymond had said anything in the preceding days about the area, anything he had seen or heard. Dale said no. The investigator then asked whether, in 14 years of hunting together, Dale had ever seen Raymond standing outside like that at night before. Dale paused before answering. He said no. That single behavioral anomaly, the one moment in the reconstructed timeline where Raymond's conduct deviated from 14 years of established pattern, was logged in the file. The investigator drew no conclusions from it. It may mean nothing. It has never been explained. Before we look at the investigation as a whole, it's worth pausing on what Dale Fitch's follow-up account actually represents. In missing persons investigations, follow-up witness interviews routinely surface details that weren't included in the initial statement. This isn't unusual. A person gives their first account under stress, often within hours of reporting a loved one missing. They answer the questions they're asked, details that seemed unimportant at the time, a minor behavioral change, a brief unexplained moment. Don't make the cut. The standard investigative practice is to return to key witnesses days or weeks later, after the immediate urgency is settled, and ask them to walk through their timeline again in granular detail. That's when Dale mentioned the 2 a.m. moment at the tree line. The investigator's notes from that session show he asked Dale 3 follow-up questions after Dale described what he'd seen. First, did Raymond say anything when he came back into the tent? Dale said Raymond had come back in quietly and gone back to sleep. He hadn't said anything. Second, was Raymond dressed when he was standing outside? Dale said yes. He still had his base layers on, the clothes he'd slept in. He wasn't geared up or prepared to go anywhere. Third, and this is the one the investigator returned to twice. Did Raymond seem agitated or alert or concerned in any way? Dale thought about it. He said Raymond had seemed focused. That was the word he used. Focused. Not alarmed. Not frightened. Focused. The investigator noted that distinction in the file. Focused suggests deliberate attention, watching or listening for something specific, not reacting to a noise or feeling generally unsettled. Dale offered no interpretation of what that meant. The investigator didn't push him toward one. It was logged. It was never explained. And it sits alongside everything else in this case as a detail that is small enough, individually, to set aside, and yet fits a pattern that no one has been able to fully articulate. A man who annotated a section of rough, poor habitat terrain on his map for 32 years without telling his son why. A man who left that map in the truck on the one day it might have mattered. A man who was found by a witness moving northeast toward that section at a pace faster than hunting. A man who stood at the edge of the dark the night before, focused on something in the trees. None of those details prove anything, but they are the details that Raymond Cord's case rests on. And they are the details that have resisted every attempt at a clean explanation for 11 years. Let's look at what the investigation actually produced, in total. A trail camera confirmed Raymond entered the wilderness at 6:47 a.m. A witness reported a figure moving northeast, away from Raymond's planned area, approximately 90 minutes later. But that account reached investigators after search resources were already committed elsewhere. Tracking dogs followed Raymond's scent 3/4 of a mile north and could not continue. 12 days of searching by 60 volunteers and aerial thermal imaging produced no physical evidence past that endpoint. 8 inches of snow fell on day 4. 6 weeks later, Raymond's rifle was found 4 miles northeast, placed against a tree, unfired, undisturbed, in an area the search had not thoroughly covered. No other physical evidence was ever recovered. The case was reviewed by cold case investigators in 2019. No new leads were found. The official position remains that the cause and circumstances of Raymond Cord's disappearance are undetermined. Now let's examine why every standard explanation falls short. This section matters, because the natural response to a case like Raymond Cord's is to assume that one of the standard explanations must be right, that investigators simply didn't find the evidence, or that it was destroyed by weather, or that something ordinary happened that hasn't been fully pieced together yet. Those are reasonable assumptions. They're the right starting point. But they run into specific problems when applied to the documented facts of this case, and those problems are worth working through carefully. Because this isn't a case where investigators lacked resources, or where the search was poorly organized, or where key evidence was mishandled. The search coordinator's own assessment was that the operation was well executed. The outcome, the completeness of the absence of evidence, was the anomaly, not the process. Disorientation in familiar terrain is the most common cause of wilderness disappearance among experienced subjects. But conditions on November 14th were cold and clear. Visibility was good, and Raymond's last medical checkup 3 months earlier was unremarkable. More critically, a disoriented person who succumbs to exposure in accessible terrain leaves a body. 12 days of searching at scale should have found him. They didn't. A sudden medical event, cardiac arrest, stroke, can strike without warning regardless of health history. But a person incapacitated by a medical event doesn't move. They stay where they fall. They don't disappear from the evidence record. An animal encounter, black bears, mountain lions, and occasional grizzlies are all documented in the Selkirks, was considered. But predator incidents leave blood, disturbed ground, and in most cases partial remains. Search teams specifically trained to recognize those signs found none of them. The involvement of another person was examined. Raymond's personal and financial life showed no conflicts, no disputes, no apparent motive. Dale Fitch's account was consistent across multiple interviews and corroborated by 2 hunters who encountered him on the Eastern Trail that morning. No physical evidence consistent with foul play was found. When the cold case team closed their 2019 review, the lead investigator's summary contained one sentence that Raymond's family has returned to many times. He wrote, "The evidence in this case is insufficient to support any specific conclusion regarding cause or circumstances of disappearance. Not a wrong answer, not a hidden answer, no answer." There is one additional aspect of the case that the cold case review raised and did not resolve, and that is the question of Raymond's radio. Raymond carried a handheld radio specifically for contact with Dale during hunts. It was a model he had used for several years, a mid-range wilderness unit capable of reaching Dale's radio at distances up to several miles in open terrain, less in heavy timber. Both Dale and Raymond kept their radios charged before every trip. The radio was never found. This is listed in the evidence inventory as a missing item, alongside the compass and the knife and the food supply. But the radio carries a specific implication that the other missing items don't. If Raymond was injured or incapacitated somewhere in that wilderness, the radio would have been with him. And a radio in functioning condition, even if its owner couldn't use it, can be detected. Search teams in the field attempted to reach Raymond's frequency during the active search. They received no response, which means either the radio was off or its battery had failed, or it was no longer in range of any transmitter, or it was not where they were searching. None of those explanations close cleanly either. A radio that is off, or whose battery has failed, stays with the person who carried it. A radio that is not in range suggests the person moved further than search teams reached. And a radio that simply isn't where searchers are looking points back to the same question the whole case points back to. Where did Raymond Cord go after the point on the trail where the dogs stopped? That question is the center of gravity in this case. Every detail orbits it. Every failed theory circles back to it. And 11 years later, it remains unanswered. Raymond Cord's case is not the only one of its kind. Kenneth White was 53 years old when he disappeared during a solo hunting trip in the Bitterroot Mountains of Montana in October 2004. 20-plus years in that specific range. His truck was found at the trailhead. His camp was undisturbed. His dog, which he had brought with him, was found at the campsite in good physical condition, but would not leave the area, and would not respond to commands from searchers. Handlers attempted to use the dog to assist tracking. The dog would not move from camp. A professional tracking dog, brought in separately, followed White's scent for approximately 1 mile before losing it in a creek drainage. The search continued for 10 days. Kenneth White was never found. No physical evidence was recovered. The search coordinator's closing report used language nearly identical to the report filed on Raymond Cord 8 years later. The absence of physical evidence was described as inconsistent with what a search of that duration and scale should have produced. Walter Stringer was 61 years old when he disappeared in the Cascade foothills of Oregon in October 2009. He had hunted those hills for 25 years. He signed the voluntary trail log at the Forest Service trailhead before he entered. His planned route, his expected return time, his emergency contact. He was methodical. He followed procedure. He was never seen again. Search dogs tracked him to a point in a dry creek bed and stopped. The search ran 9 days across that section of the Cascades. 3 months later, a Forest Service employee conducting a routine wildlife survey found a set of boot prints near a small spring, approximately 6 miles from where the dogs had stopped. The tread pattern was consistent with the boots Walter had been wearing. The prints led toward the spring. They did not come out the other side. The spring was less than a foot deep. There was no indication Walter had crossed it, waded through it, or gone around it. The prints simply stopped at the water's edge. The Forest Service employee photographed them and reported to the county sheriff. Investigators returned to the site. By the time they arrived, weather had degraded the prints beyond the point of further analysis. What those prints represented, whether Walter had waded through and the exit prints were destroyed, whether he had stopped at the spring and collapsed somewhere nearby, whether the prints told a story that weather erased before anyone could read it, was never established. Walter Stringer has never been found. 2 experienced hunters, different states, different years, different search teams. Both sent trails that professional handlers could not complete. Both subjects who went into familiar terrain and produced no recoverable physical record of where they went. Both search coordinators who wrote closing reports using language that described the outcome as anomalous. 3 cases, counting Raymond Cord's, 3 open files. David Pallades, who spent years compiling wilderness disappearance data through public records requests to federal land management agencies, identified a set of features he found appearing with unusual frequency across cases involving experienced subjects. Scent trails that couldn't be completed, missing navigation and communication equipment, evidence located in areas previously searched, weather events during the search window, and experience levels inconsistent with the completeness of the disappearance. All 5 features appear in Raymond Cord's case. Most appear in Kenneth White's and Walter Stringer's as well. Critics of Pallades' methodology have raised a legitimate concern that selecting cases by specific features and then noting their presence creates a circular analytical problem. Without a comparison group of similar disappearances that were resolved, it is difficult to know whether these features are genuinely anomalous or simply common to wilderness searches that happen to remain unsolved. Those concerns are valid and worth sitting with. But those coordinators were not researchers with an agenda. They were operational professionals documenting outcomes that surprised them. That's worth taking seriously on its own terms. There is something worth understanding about how wilderness disappearance investigations are structured, because it shapes what is and isn't possible for cases like Raymond Cord's. When a search ends without finding the subject, jurisdiction typically remains with the county sheriff's office. The case stays open, classified as missing persons. But the operational structure that supported the search, the personnel, the coordination, the daily decision-making, disperses. Investigators move to other cases. The file is maintained, reviewed when tips come in, and formally revisited if something new surfaces. What that means in practice is that the most intensive investigative effort in a wilderness disappearance is concentrated in the first 2 weeks. After that, the case depends on new information arriving from outside, a hiker finding something, a witness remembering something, a records review turning up a detail that was missed. In Raymond Cord's case, the one piece of new information that arrived, the rifle, found 6 weeks later, raised more questions than it answered, and nothing has arrived since. The 2019 Cold Case Review was the most recent formal examination of the file. The reviewing investigator spent several weeks going through the original search reports, the witness interview transcripts, and the evidence inventory. His summary concluded with the line that the family has returned to many times. The evidence is insufficient to support any specific conclusion. That review is now 5 years old. The case remains where it was when that summary was written. After the active search ended, Raymond Cord's family did what families in this situation often do. His wife, Patricia, described the transition from active search to passive investigation as a second disappearance, the disappearance of the effort itself. She told a regional journalist in 2021 that over time she had come to think about the difference between a case being unsolved and a case being unsolvable. She wasn't sure which category Raymond's fell into. She said she thought about that distinction often. His son Marcus filed public records requests and obtained portions of the case file. He read the search reports. He corresponded with other families in similar situations and with researchers who had studied wilderness disappearances. He was careful in an interview several years after his father vanished about what that research actually told him. He said it confirmed that the experience his family had, a thorough investigation, adequate resources, and still no answer, was not unique. Other investigators had written the same kinds of closing summaries. Other families were in the same place. He said, "At some point, you have to sit with the fact that the investigation did what it could do, and what it could do wasn't enough. That's not a failure. That's just the limit of what's knowable." Marcus organized 2 additional private searches in the years following his father's disappearance, using professional teams and updated mapping. Both focused on the northeastern section, the area consistent with the witness sighting, with the rifle, with the annotated section of the map. They found nothing. The Boundary County Sheriff's Office has confirmed the case remains open. The Cold Case Review in 2019 found no new leads, and the hand-drawn map, 32 years of seasons recorded in layered ink, is still in the glove compartment of a truck that has long since been returned to the family. Folded the way Raymond always folded it, placed deliberately. The northeastern section annotated in ways that his own son never understood. Whatever Raymond was tracking in that section, across 3 decades of hunts, he never told anyone. 4 questions remain in the investigative file, unresolved after 11 years. What happened between the trail fork and the point 3/4 of a mile north, where the dog stopped? What drew Raymond back to that northeastern section of the map, season after season, in terrain his own son said he rarely hunted? What was Raymond doing at the edge of the campsite at 2 in the morning? The only moment in 14 years of partnership that Dale Fitch could not account for. And why was the rifle where it was found, placed the way it was placed, in the one area of the northeastern ridgeline that the search had not been able to confirm as covered? Investigators could not answer those questions in 2013. The Cold Case Review could not answer them in 2019. They remain open. If anyone who was in the Selkirk Mountain Wilderness Unit of northern Idaho during the week of November 14th has information that has not been reported, The Boundary County Sheriff's Office is still accepting contact. Raymond Cord's family is still looking for answers. 11 years is a long time, but the questions haven't changed, and there is one final detail that is worth ending on. Not because it changes the investigative picture, but because it captures something about the nature of this case that facts alone don't fully convey. Marcus Cord, in the interview he gave several years after his father's disappearance, was asked whether he had ever gone back to the trailhead. He said yes. Once, about 3 years after Raymond vanished, he'd driven up alone, parked in the same gravel lot, stood at the same trail fork where his father and Dale had separated that November morning. He said he'd walked north along the trail, the same north branch Raymond had taken, until he reached the approximate location where the dogs had stopped. He couldn't be precise about the exact spot. There was nothing to mark it. It looked like any other point on any other trail. Just trees, just ground. He stood there for a while. He said what struck him was not that the place felt significant. It was that it didn't. It was completely ordinary. There was nothing in the terrain to suggest that anything unusual had happened there, or that this was a place where the trail record of a person simply stopped. He said, "You expect there to be something? Some reason? Some feature of the landscape that explains why it was this spot and not somewhere else? There's nothing. It's just a place on a trail." He walked back to his truck and drove home. The trail is still there. The wilderness is still there. Hunters still park in that gravel lot every November and walk north into the Selkirks. Raymond Cord's case file is still open, and the spot on the trail where the scent ended, the spot that looks like any other spot, is still just a place. Ordinary, unremarkable, with no explanation attached to it. That's where the investigation stands. That's where it has stood for 11 years. And that, more than anything else in this file, is what makes this case worth remembering.